super excited to have AJ Alston here on the podcast today.
Me too.
And we have a ton of questions lined up for you, and you are our paid search team lead, correct? And before we get into the questions, if you could just briefly tell us like what you do and what your team does on the day-to-day.
For sure. So kind of what I do is hopefully orchestrate and support everyone in the team to make sure that we are working towards the same goal, because there are a lot of different things that we need to have our hands on, and making sure that we are providing the best service possible to our clients. And then from like a wider perspective, as a team, our goals are to make sure that we spend the client's money effectively. So making sure that we optimize those campaigns, really put the dollars where they need to be spent, and then also make sure that we are communicating effectively, whether that's reporting metrics or ideas for the future or ways that we can improve processes.
And roughly, how many clients do you think each individual team member had, like the accounts that they're handling? How much do you think each one right now is managing?
Right now, I think we're about 15 to 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It is a lot. Fortunately, though, and kind of like we'll talk a little bit, but we have a lot of tools and systems that help us speed up a ton of different processes that otherwise would take the better part of a month. A lot of those things can be done in the background while we are handling more of the, I guess, like high IQ decisions and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. So today's topic is automation, so we're kind of hinting towards that.
Yes, sir.
But let's just start off. So what does automation look like in advertising?
That's a very solid question. I think right now in Sokal it looks different because there are two kind of areas that we can focus on. So one of them is the paid search side. So making sure that we are budgeting effectively, making sure that we are bidding effectively, putting our time where it makes sense to put our time. And then on the other side, I think it's more of an internal focus. How can we make sure, like I was talking earlier, that we're not bogged down by, doing the same thing for 15 to 20 clients when it's going to be the same exact process, just with a different title, such as like processing an order or maybe setting up like a targeting something. So making sure that we don't get bogged down in those things and focus our brain power, our energy towards actually improving campaigns and making sure that we're being the best team we can be.
Yeah, for sure. But so speaking of campaigns, I remember just a while ago, really more the beginning of this year, even last year, automation I don't think was quite ready for automotive. So the way I understood it back then is that it was hard to get accurate just because of the way that dealerships work and the way that we provide campaigns on places like Google and Bing. So what do you think changed in the automation process? I know Google opened up kind of this great category of people that are just strictly focused on automotive. Yeah. So what do you think was the turning point and why we're really going ahead into automation now?
Yeah, I think it's a weird journey. I think for a long time, Google had talked about all of these different tools and signals that were available to their algorithms and how they would be able to make decisions based off of a million factors that we would never have the time or really the opportunity to take a look into, especially at like scale. But even back then, 3 years ago, we were testing things like some of these automation tools to see whether or not they worked in our space. And really the biggest, if I had to point out one single thing that was the biggest fallback, was that the reporting wasn't there. So if something worked or if something didn't work, you didn't know why. There was no information or feedback for us to say, okay, this works because of this, so let's try it in this area to see if it also helps us out there. And because of that, not only were we a little bit confused and frustrated, but when we would report back to Google or Bing or whoever we were working with, they didn't really have any information to give us or things to guide us with. Whereas now, there are very specific guidelines, there are pages that you can go to, there's tons of different reporting options available, and I think just that and the support that we're getting from our reps now has been a huge difference and really made us feel more comfortable in that space.
Yeah, no, that's a big difference from what I was hearing with the issues, just in terms of, like you mentioned, why would something go wrong? So
because stuff does go wrong.
to be an effective team, we have to figure that out and then report back and be like, hey, this is what worked and this didn't. And so if we're not getting active reporting, it doesn't work. But it sounds like they've turned that around.
Yeah, they're doing a good job.
Yeah. So what about automation? You mentioned briefly automation internal. So what we're doing here inside Sokal, just briefly, what do you mean when you say automated processes and things like that?
Yeah, so one of the ones I kind of touched on earlier was order processing. So we need to be able to take this money or this budget or this idea of a campaign and transform it into action items for Google and Bing and for the rest of our team. And that process is going to look the same for every single client. But it doesn't make sense for us to spend, multiple hours on every single client, because then we wouldn't be able to launch everything in those first few days of the month. So we've been able to work with the developers, and they've done an incredible job of hearing our needs and working with us to figure out what makes sense in terms of workflow and how do we kind of build our own checks and balances. So one of the things that we also use is we use Slack internally as like a messaging client. And within Slack, you can set up specific channels. And so we have quite a few channels that are just bots that will let us know if something is going wrong.
They definitely let us know.
They do, they do, which is great, because otherwise it's almost impossible to plan for the future if you're constantly trying to check for your mistakes or check for things that could be wrong. And oftentimes those bots aren't telling us that something is necessarily wrong, it's just telling us, hey, this has been the same for 3 days, is that okay? And that's a great thing for us to know, because not only can we make plans off of that, but we can also say, okay, we see this alert a lot, is this something that is just the norm? And then we can tell that bot, hey, adjust for this.
Yeah.
It's not something we need to worry about. We need you to focus on this thing.
Yeah, let's add some switches here, some items here that say if this happens, do these things, which is powerful. So that's really amazing to hear that we can integrate that and kind of stand apart from just having to go manually check all the time. Do you think that the way things are progressing, automation is here for good? Is that going to be a standard basically moving forward?
Definitely. I think automation has been here for a while. I think the automotive space was a little bit slow to pick up on it, but I do think that one of the things, as we continue to grow and as businesses continue to become more complex, there's not going to be a feasible way to scale all the different inputs and outputs that are possible. So for example, and I think maybe we might get into this a little bit later, but one of the reasons that we like smart bidding so much on Google and Bing is because they have access to way more signals than we could ever have. So
briefly define smart bidding, just quickly.
Yeah, for sure. So smart bidding is allowing the algorithm to take in signals and determine whether or not that person should be bidded higher or lower.
Okay.
Basically saying, we think this person is likely to convert or not likely to convert, and because of that, we're willing to pay more or less.
Gotcha.
Cool. So with Google and Bing, one of the things that we really like about those tools is that they're able to take in so many different inputs that we would never see. So not only do they know what time of day it is, what the weather is like outside, whether or not this person's been on their computer for 5 minutes or for 5 hours, how many times this person has searched this particular term, whether or not this person has a family, whether it's all these different things that we could never, on a client by client, individual by individual basis, just never dream of doing.
Right.
It can handle that for us, and it can make smart decisions based off of that information. So just being able to let go a little bit, it's scary, especially kind of as we move into the automotive space, which is a very personal experience. But as we kind of give way to let the algorithms take care of some of those things, we can focus on the bigger picture ideas of where do we need to be putting budget, what kind of campaigns do we need to run to really focus towards this group of people, what's the best way for our specialists to learn and develop their skills, things like that really are going to push our business up and over.
So when we were talking earlier, and you were talking about how the algorithms and the automations are able to just make decisions faster, they're just quicker than we can be, I guess.
Yeah.
Could you just briefly explain, or an example of 1 or 2 decisions that it can make quickly, so that we're able to focus on those big picture items like you're mentioning?
Yeah. I guess a good example would be kind of like we were talking about with bids. So we decide someone is more or less likely to convert, and because of that, we want to spend more or less money to show them our ad. And not only does that happen hundreds of thousands of time
right.
per day per client. But also there are kind of like micro decisions that have to be made within that, kind of like we were talking about earlier. Some of those different inputs, like whether or not the person has searched this thing before, maybe they visited our website and they've shown that they're interested in a car, but maybe they don't know which car it is.
Right.
So for us to, as a team, to figure out what it takes for that person to be interested, whether or not we should bid up or down.
Take forever.
It would take forever, and it wouldn't be feasible in terms of, because at that point we would be trying to cater to a specific individual when our advertising approach is way more holistic.
Yeah.
Exactly. We have to focus on the client's goals, the client's needs, and the people that fall in within that. It's not necessarily like, oh, Drew, I've heard that you really like the Corolla,
right.
so I'm going to make sure.
I'm just going to focus all my effort on you.
Exactly. So just trying to make sure that we let the algorithms, let smart bidding and automation kind of take care of those, like you said, day-to-day decisions really helps us out in terms of big picture stuff and moving forward.
So when we're thinking about smart bidding and automation, they can be scary words.
Yeah.
And the overarching question is, will agencies, companies, specialists become obsolete? Like,
yeah,
can I just pay the computer? Everything you're telling me is like, I can just have the machine do it. It's taking care of it. So what's the answer to that question?
Definitely don't let the computer just take care of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Kind of like we were talking about earlier, it's the computer can only do as much as you tell it to. So we aren't just saying, Google, Bing, here, take this, do this for us. We're saying, hey, Google and Bing, here are the parameters, here are our clients' goals, here's specifically what we are trying to accomplish, and this is the direction we want to move. Use that information as well as the information that you have access to and move us in that direction.
Right.
And then we kind of push it along as it goes.
So in pushing it along, what are those overarching things that you're monitoring? So like, what then influences the next thing to say, oh, let's set the algorithm to do this instead? Yeah,
so with smart bidding, just like a lot of things, are usually options. And so we firmly believe that not one size fits all.
Right.
So we have to work specifically with those clients to figure out what those goals are, and then see what best aligns in terms of smart bidding practices. So an example would be, maybe a client isn't focused on pulling in that many VDP views. Instead, they want to focus on calls and impression share. They just want to make sure they're showing up in their area, and they want to make sure that the phones are ringing because they really trust their sales staff to move those conversations along. And so that might look different from someone who only wants to focus on VDP views, SRP views, and leads. And so kind of given those factors, as well as some other things, we have to make decisions and let the algorithm know, like, not only do you not need to focus on this thing, but you do need to focus on this thing. And that can be a bigger scale thing or a smaller scale thing as well. It can kind of limit itself to, maybe the algorithm is working really well, but it's ignoring this very key metric that the dealer cares about. Or it could be the algorithm isn't working very well because it's focused on all of these different factors, and the dealer only cares about this one factor.
Right. So then it's not as valuable, and it's sort of a waste of time.
It can be, which is why we work really hard to figure out, with all our different scenarios, with all our different inputs, what's the best output, and how can smart bidding, whether that's Google or Bing, help us move in that direction.
Right. Earlier you mentioned we have our own internal automated processes.
Yeah.
Automating processes? Automated processes.
Yeah.
What would you say is the best one? I know we have a lot.
Ooh.
And you mentioned one with the Slack integration and our
Yes.
bots. So, and some people make bots. Like, what are you talking about? What's the one that's like, I don't know if the best is the right term, more so like just a powerful automation tool that we use. It kind of sets us apart to be accurate and really serve clients well. But it's our internal process.
Yeah. I think I'm going to cheat and give you two.
Okay.
One that we currently use a ton, and then one that we are working on and hoping to use a lot in the future. So I would say the one that we rely on a lot right now is our budget bot software. And so, not to give away our secret sauce, but part of it, what it does is it goes into Google and Bing and it takes in different numbers and says, okay, based off of what I know, this is on pace, ahead of pace, or behind pace. And not only does it keep that information internal, but it also shares that with us on the team. So we can say, okay, these accounts, these campaigns, right on pace, perfect. So I don't need to worry about budgeting them, but I do need to worry about optimizing them. That, like I said earlier, just kind of making sure that we're spending our time where it's most effective.
Right.
And then that bot also has kind of bigger, I guess, implications or like further reaching hands.
Right. Where
not only can it look at money and say, this is ahead or behind, but it can also say, if you move money here, then this might happen, or if you move money here, then this might happen. So it's a little bit of a, almost like a catch-all for us, which is why I said that it's really powerful, and it's one of the things that we use the most right now, because I think without it, we wouldn't be able to accomplish as much as we're able to. It would just be way too difficult.
Right. So what's the second one? That's the first one.
Yeah.
What's the second one?
So the second one is something that is super exciting, and we've been working on for a little bit of time now. The devs have been really great about just listening to our needs, like I mentioned earlier, and just trying to figure out how can we be more effective? How can we be more efficient? And so one of the things that we've really wanted to be able to do is to have almost like a master list and say, for most stores, these are the things that work best. And when we have that master list, we would like to be able to push it out to every single client we have. So let's say, for example, we find out that automation and Google and Bing is the best thing that's ever came out, and that this particular form of smart bidding works for 85-90% of clients.
Right.
Instead of for us having to go into each individual client and say, turn that on, turn that on, turn that on, turn that on, we could say, hey, master list, use this setting, push it out to all of these things. And so that would be a complete game changer for us, because not only would we be able to make those kind of like big sweeping changes a lot more quickly,
fast,
but also we'd be able to get data back from them. So we could say, okay, we push that out to 85-90% of our clients. 2-3 months later, give us all that data back. Let us know how we're doing.
Yeah, did it work? Did it not work?
Exactly.
What do we need to change? Yeah.
And then we can see, okay, maybe it worked for, let's say, 50% of the clients, and for the other 50, it didn't work, and it didn't work in 2 different ways.
Wow.
Then we can split it out in those different ways and figure out, okay, what are our next game plans? What steps do we need to take in order to make changes or be better? And that would be incredible. So I'm really excited about it.
And even if we push out, the on switch, basically like apply all, we can still go back in if something's going wrong and take off ones that aren't working. Yeah, and we don't have to. Yeah,
and that's what our job is. That's
right.
We're figuring out what works for each individual client, even if that means we're trying to push the needle. We're trying to figure out if we can use this cookie cutter thing. But like I mentioned earlier, most of the times cookie cutter doesn't work, and
it doesn't.
That's why you don't need to fire your
specialist.
So
we have a team of specialists.
Exactly. So that's our role, and that's what we are really excited about doing, is just figuring out how we can be faster and better so that we can spend more time figuring out the little quirks of each individual account, and not just copy and pasting numbers or creating reports that something else could create for us, things like that.
Well, this has been super insightful, very helpful.
Awesome.
I think it's going to benefit a lot of people.
I'm glad.
Before we sign off, though, I do have one overarching scary question to ask you, which is, if automation is here to stay and we're in the right direction, we're moving in the right direction, what's the next biggest trend to come up? What do you think, if you had to speculate, what's that next big trend we should be aware of?
That is a great question. My gut tells me that the next big trend is reporting. I think that right now, Google and Bing and a lot of just digital advertising mediums, they provide information, they provide data, but it's not always actionable or useful. And oftentimes you have to be certified in something to really understand what it means.
Right.
And I think that as more people want to advertise online, as more people see more advertisements online, they're going to want to understand what it actually means and what those numbers represent. And so I think there will be a big push. I'm not sure from who, because right now it feels like Google kind of has a stronghold on the reporting game.
For sure.
And I'm not sure that anyone would be able to
rival that.
Yeah, really challenge them in that. But also Google is starting to feel some pressure from outside sources saying, can you clarify this?
Right.
Can you make sure you're protecting people's data in this way? So I do think we're kind of on the cusp of a change there. I don't know what it will be, but I think that that's something to keep on in the back of our heads, I guess.
For sure. Well, AJ, thanks for coming on. This has been great, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future when
for sure.
that another trend or something like that comes on. So thanks again.
Thank you.